So now I am absolutely delighted to welcome Bill Gates on stage, chair of the Gates Foundation, founder of the Giving Pledge, together with Warren Buffett, co-founder of Microsoft in 1975 and other companies. You've been named as one of the most influential people in this world, and you've influenced the lives of so many people, so many of us in this room, through Microsoft products, for example, and so many lives of people in the developing countries. Welcome. And welcome. Yeah, the middle one. And a very warm welcome on stage today, BDI President Peter Leibinger. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for sharing your insights with all of us. You've been in Germany for a moment now. I don't know, how many hours?
I was here this weekend. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came in this weekend. It was nice and sunny, so I got some time to relax. And then a lot of government meetings and a very nice award yesterday.
Deutsche Bank CEO Christian Sewing, who was here, also posted on LinkedIn a little bit of the moment that you received the award. So we got kind of a sneak preview for today. Yeah. How do you like Germany, and how would you define Germany's role in these times of turmoil?
Well, Germany's always been very generous in terms of its aid budget, and believing that countries have to work together, not just Europe, but including Europe coming together to share things, and then thinking about how we solve long-term problems, peace, climate change. And so the foundation's had a fantastic history here. Microsoft always had a fantastic relationship. And I remember when the Berlin Wall came down, Siemens, who we had this close relationship, actually brought and gave to us, which is on the Microsoft campus, one of those cement blocks, which is a very special thing. So I've been coming to Germany in my Microsoft and foundation career a great deal. I'd say the role of Germany is more acute today as the U.S. is less cooperative and sort of causing people to question a lot of things. Even the aid generosity, where at least in absolute it was the largest, it's made these massive cuts. So it's great to have Germany thinking about a more cooperative approach. Even here, there's budget challenges, so we're trying to work with our partners here to get German politicians to feel proud of where they've been generous and try and maintain the aid budget as much as possible.
Yeah, we're actually waiting to find out more today about the final budget. We had our finance minister was here yesterday. It was very interesting. And then he had to quickly move on. He's like, I still have talks about the budget. You mentioned how important it was to work together now. And you said nobody can go this alone. Nobody can do it alone. How would you like to see cooperation changing?
Well, it's interesting that we have changed a while ago, and very fitting in that context, that we have changed the wording from foreign aid to development cooperation, and that very much underscores what you're trying to allude to. We in Germany have a very strong history of development cooperation. Our annual budget for this is about 30 billion euros. We're one of the very few countries that nearly reaches the 0.7% goal of the UN. However, I think we have a bit of a skewed view having to do with a very high moral stance that we have in Germany, as in such that our Ministry for Development Cooperation thinks that development cooperation and commercial cooperation must not go together. And I think this is a fundamental flaw. Of course, I can understand where they're coming from, where there shouldn't be the impression that we're only doing it for our own benefit. This is really very simply put what the thought is behind that. But on the other hand, by being on such high moral grounds, we completely give up the most important chance that we have for development cooperation. At the end of the day, life in a functioning country relies on a functioning economy. And a functioning economy can only work through trade. So I think we should do the two things linked together. And the BDI, the Federation of German Industries, has published a paper on this last year. We got a lot of heat for it, quite frankly. But I think that was wrong. I think we were misunderstood. And I'm very happy that we can discuss this a bit here on stage before we talk about technology.
I think I'm glad you just brought up the word benefit, because I believe we are experiencing times in which we might want to think about phrasing a little bit different, and how we define certain words and what we attribute to them. So if we take the word benefit, how could we spin it a little bit for the future, for future collaboration?
I think with the last thing that I said, there's the bridge. In the past, we had, and I'm simplifying probably not in a correct way, but I'll do it anyways. We tended to think in large projects from German perspective that we tried to fund. I'm going back 30, 40 years, you know, the dam projects, so to speak, or other power grid projects and so forth, where there was a very direct and close link between foreign aid and work that large German corporations did in foreign countries in the so-called global South. And these were often prone to corruption and things of that type. And this is why this got a bad reputation. So, but today, in today's technological world, things are different. They're much more grassroots, and we see a lot of examples of that, where satellite technology is used by farmers in the global South to plant their crops in a better way, where satellite links are used for grassroots types, banking systems, etc. And here lies an opportunity for German industry and German economy to engage in these types of activities by being in a more direct link, and by a German Ministry of Cooperation, Development Cooperation, fostering this type of grassroots work on the ground level. I think that, last word to that, for instance, the German apprenticeship program that we have could be an incredible benefit for instance, Sub-Saharan Africa. A friend of mine is very engaged in doing this in Burkina Faso, and has built a school there using the German apprenticeship program to train young people in Sub-Saharan Africa. And I think that a lot of German companies have the means to do the same. It doesn't take a lot of money. It takes the know-how, and it takes the will. And the will is there, but the permission needs to be there also from the ministry, if I'm allowed to put it in a very simple term.
Now, we haven't really talked much about Africa during the past hours and yesterday, but actually has a huge implication for stability, also for our economic stability. When you think about the word benefit, help us define the importance with regards to development aid and economic stability.
Well, the goal of all these cooperative efforts, including the aid, should be to help countries become self-sufficient. And there is a big contrast that the aid that's gone to a lot of Asian countries, they have reached the point that they become middle income. And so, for example, the group called Gavi that raises money for vaccines, it got started, was one of the first things the Gates Foundation did at the turn of the century, was together with Germany, the US, and others, create this group. And it is one of the primary reasons why the number of children who die every year, which was over 10 million a year, has gone down. Now it's under 5 million a year. Gavi is the buying of these new vaccines and getting them out to children is a big reason for that. The way Gavi set it up was that when a country went past a certain income level, then it would continue to get the low prices and technical support, but it had to fund the vaccines on its own. And so in the early years, India, Indonesia, Vietnam were recipients. Then they passed that income threshold, and so they completely finance it themselves. We have a few countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Yemen, Afghanistan, that still are Gavi recipients, but now it's very much focused on Africa, almost 70% of the money, because those countries are at a lower level. And I gave a speech in the Nelson Mandela Hall in the African Union a couple weeks ago where I talked about the fact that the Gates Foundation is giving away all its money during the next 20 years. And I said, part of the reason for that is that I expect over those 20 years, even the countries in Africa, if we're generous to them, will get out of the poverty trap. You know, there's a real poverty trap where if you're too poor, you can't get nourishment for your kids, you can't fund the education system. You know, right now, African countries are paying more in interest than they fund to their health and education. They really need help, and you know, they have some tough diseases, things like malaria. But with cooperation, generosity, and innovation, you know, like we have a partnership with BioNTech to make vaccines for the 3 big remaining diseases, TB, HIV, and malaria. Anyway, if the right things are done over that 20-year period, these countries, virtually all of them, despite where they are today, will get out of that poverty trap and they'll be self-sufficient. And so accelerating that is kind of a positive thing that, you know, they're very engaged in. In fact, you know, a lot of the heads of state will be there tomorrow for this Gavi event to, you know, encourage more generosity. You know, unfortunately, with the cuts to all the aid budgets, including the German aid budget, we'll raise about 30% less for vaccines than we did 5 years ago.
Now, a lot has been written recently about the Gates Foundation being closed down in 20 years. How difficult was it to come to terms with this decision? Well, in 20 years, there are foundations that choose to last forever. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit of a weird thing because they're always trying to figure out, you know, what did the founder want? You know, maybe he scribbled something down and, you know, Cecil Rhodes did a foundation that was for white rugby players and they decided to interpret that a little more broadly over time. And so, you know, that's been a good thing. In my view, 20 years from now, there will be more rich people even than there are today. And the problems that the Gates Foundation works on, take malaria. We will eradicate malaria and polio, and we will largely end the HIV epidemic in these 20 years. Well, and there may be a few diseases that there's still work to be done on. And there may be a few of these African countries that haven't gotten to middle income status. But the world will be far, far richer. You know, just imagine 20 years of AI-driven innovation in medicine and all the different areas. And so there'll be young people who know what the situation is then, and they'll be able to you know, attack those things that remain. So the idea of my, you know, people reading some cryptic thing I said, I'd rather have the money be spent more aggressively now, where the need for those vaccines and to get rid of those diseases is very, very
clear. And it's fun for me. I love this work. I'll turn 70 this year, so I'll have to retire when I'm 90.
If I recall correctly, in one of those articles, you said, I don't want people to say he died rich. What would you like people to say about you when you've gone into the other world?
Nothing about me in particular, but I would like people, when they read in the future about this thing called malaria, for them to go, what was that? When you read old novels, you'll always read, oh, they had consumption. That's a name for tuberculosis, which in the rich world, we don't have tuberculosis. It still is the biggest infectious disease killer. It's about 1.3 million deaths per year. And that's another one that we should be able to get rid of. So I'd rather have it be what was polio, what was malaria, what was consumption or TB, because they are going to be solved problems. A kid born in Africa has a 50 times greater chance of dying before the age of 5 than somebody born in Germany or the US. And, I love the market, but we have to be creative about how we take the market and have it meet certain human needs. So, when I gave 30 million for malaria, I became the biggest funder of malaria research. And I was like, wait a minute, this thing kills 1 million children a year. And I'm the biggest funder? That makes no sense. But the kids who get malaria, their voice in the marketplace is very small. It's better to do dog food or, erectile dysfunction, than to go work on malaria. The voice of the marketplace is very strong. And so, can you have a capitalism that's a little more broad in its thinking, going beyond just those demand signals, and to factor in somewhat, I love capitalism, but to factor in somewhat, these other areas. And that's why, people like BioNTech, if we help them out a little bit so they're not losing money on these projects, they will assign some of their best people. They're going to make a lot of money on cancer, but fortunately their heart and soul also includes doing this work on infectious disease.
Now, Peter Leibinger just promised that we would also be talking about technology. What role do you see technology playing in this, and also the importance of being open to technology?
Well, I think I must say, I know it's probably completely inappropriate, but I really admire your attitude in the sense that it's personal humility in combination with this positive spirit that we can change things. I opened this thing yesterday in my speech saying we should never see ourselves as victims. We can be the ones who change things, and this is basically what you're saying. And I share this attitude. And of course, technology is one of the keys to do so. We have had in Germany for the past year the spirit that we have to scale back everything in order to solve problems. And I don't subscribe to this view at all. I think the way forward is an active one. We can solve our problems by using technology. I'm much broader now, of course, than just development cooperation. I'm talking about climate change, for instance. But yes, I do see Germany playing a role in this fundamentally. We talked we briefly talked before this also about, for instance, laser fusion and fission power generation. I see that as one way forward, and I find that Germany could be in a unique role, and not in development cooperation terms, not an easy one, because German industry especially is typically more in a B2B role. And the B2B role in terms of development cooperation tends to be one of large projects. And earlier I said these can be problematic. So the B2C grassroots type technology development cooperation work can be very successful. Having said that, we have very fundamental problems in the world concerning basic infrastructure. And I do think that Germany can play a role there. And of course, one of my favorite topics is laser fusion. I think that this is definitely something that we should work on. But I use this more as an example for where investment in technological advancement and a very structured and systematic technology strategy by governments jointly with industry and research can not only lead to benefits here, but can lead to benefits around the world. And I think these are the things that we have to strive for.
So how do we do this? You've had a lot of experience of cooperating with governments through your foundation. How do we make his vision come true?
Yeah, so when the Gates Foundation is working on global health, we spend about half the money on this R&D work to create new tools, and we spend about half the money on the delivery piece. And this is the next 20 years will be a golden age of biological advances, partly because these new AI tools will give us insights into the biology and what's going on with these diseases. And we will be able to, in rich countries, reduce health costs. You know, that seems surprising when you have aging societies, and a lot of the new medical things seem like they just add to the expense, but we'll get through that. Likewise, in the energy space, whether it's lower cost solar or probably in the long run, the cheapest thing will be fusion. And so, you know, we can have a very positive view. As Germany is doing things like applying AI in healthcare, in education, you know, they should always have a view, okay, let's also, in parallel with our own domestic leadership in these areas, let's make sure that we're sharing some of that with the lower income countries. You know, in Africa, you can live your whole life and never meet a real doctor. The majority of people are never meet with a doctor. So when we say things like, okay, AI advice for healthcare, actually in a certain way, it's even more valuable in Africa than it is here. And that can be done in parallel. We don't need to wait 20 years for the rich countries to get these advanced technologies. We can, you know, think about it in parallel. When I first got involved in nuclear, actually I was motivated not because I thought, oh, I'll make money, but rather having cheap electricity in Africa, you know, where they actually have so little electricity, that is another part of their poverty trap, that they can't create these great jobs until infrastructure, including electricity, comes to them. And you know, how do we make that as cheap as possible and get that to move forward? And so it's, you know, long-term innovation. You know, the government has a role in the R&D. But one thing you have in Germany is that the R&D is not just in the big companies. Mm-hmm. It's in these middle-sized companies as well. And how do you kind of unlock that to have a global viewpoint of how that becomes available? It's a little bit of a unique opportunity for Germany.
We're, you know, in these times trying to get a grasp on how technology will change our lives. So when you say AI will change the insights we get into biology, could you be a bit more specific, like give us a few examples of what to expect?
Well, the biology is very complex. Even the most low-level thing of when you string these amino acids together to make these proteins, what is the shape of that protein? That's basically been an unsolved problem. But recently, a couple of entities were given the Nobel Prize because they used AI software that could take that sequence and predict that shape. And that alone doesn't solve these problems, but it's a mind-blowing building block in terms of the speed of coming up with drugs, because you actually understand what you're trying to connect up to. But even more profound is when you read out, for example, the brain of somebody who has Alzheimer's versus the brain of somebody who doesn't. The complex signaling system, the AI system, can let you get to the bottom of that. You know, sometimes we get lucky, like these obesity drugs. Actually, we didn't even understand the mechanism. We kind of lucked into that one. But more and more, the new medicines for cancer or neurological things like Alzheimer's will be because we've been able to model what is the disease state and what are you trying to interfere with. And you know, so it's incredibly promising. And hopefully that means that your health costs for the aging society aren't overwhelming you. You know, if we didn't have innovation, I would not be very optimistic. I wouldn't be very optimistic about climate change. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be very optimistic about aging societies being able to renew themselves, because so much of the spending would have to go on just taking care of the elderly people. But because of the pace of innovation going after those problems, mostly with clear market incentives, sometimes based on people's realizing, okay, the market doesn't value this, but we as humans do. Some mix of that, you know, a modest role for government in the basic R&D and some of the aid, and then the innovation very much coming out of the private sector. And so this is, for climate technologies, biology, you know, this is going to be a golden age that most people aren't seeing, because the turmoil, which is real and concerning, you know, and the United States is sort of a creator of turmoil that is a little disappointing. But the positive aspects of the speed of innovation are somewhat missed, I would say.
The a little disappointing is a very crass way of stating this. Yes, it's a little disappointing. But you were asking about benefit earlier. And one thing that of course also comes to mind is that we have a unique opportunity that we're missing with foreign aid, with development cooperation, in the sense that we can use that also for public engagement in Germany. Today we have a very hot debate starting about reenacting the mandatory service in the military for
our chancellor raised this issue yesterday.
Young people in Germany, and there's a tradition in Germany that this can also be done as civil service. However, what we have never thought about is that this combination of development cooperation state-funded and development cooperation done by companies could also be used for service, where young employees could choose to do their civil service or their military service within their company for development cooperation instead. Just one example where if we interlink things, if we work together in a more active way, we can get public engagement in this topic, which in the end is always a benefit. I mean, of course, Bill, you have done this, and I'm doing this on a little scale. You have done it on a grand scale, and I'm doing it on a little scale where I'm investing my personal time for, hopefully, the benefit of the public. And you can feel great about it, but at the end of the day, what the personal benefit really is meeting people, doing things that you wouldn't do otherwise, giving purpose to your life.
It's a question of responsibility, right? Yeah. The intrinsic responsibility.
We can use development cooperation and cooperation between business and government in development cooperation to also give purpose to people. And that's a benefit that we have never talked about.
May I use just a little bit more time of your time?
Sure.
We have to come to an end. We have to start closing this panel. But I'd like to ask you, as we were talking about turmoil and the disappointment in the development of transatlantic relations on a political level, maybe where do you see business responsibility to keep the ties close?
Transatlantic?
Yes.
You start.
Well, business is global in nature.
Yeah.
Of course, tariffs will somewhat reduce that, but because innovation is shared globally, take how we think about climate change. A little bit, we have each country coming in to make commitments on how they'll do reductions, but honestly, the way that you make electricity and steel and cement, those are global things. And so it's not like one country is going to magically come in and say, okay, we solved this. We have to collectively, whether it's government R&D or companies working together, raising capital for new approaches, we have to solve that on a global basis. And in fact, the rich countries really, because they've got the R&D capacity, have a particular responsibility, even though the emissions now are over 60% from middle-income countries. And so not only do we have to invent it and show that it works, we have to help make it available in those countries. So it's a very global thing. If we don't think globally, if we think country by country, we'll never solve climate change. It's kind of the ultimate collective action problem that should tie us all together. And if you look at the AI race, that's very much a global thing. And every country should be utilizing AI. In fact, the difference will be more who applies it than who invented it. In the digital revolution, the U.S. gained a huge advantage, not just because there was so much of it invented there, but because businesses as a whole embraced it more rapidly than other. And so here we are in the next, in some ways, even more profound chapter with AI.
So I'm not worried about the transatlantic relation, honestly, for two reasons. First of all, very simply, we're so intertwined technologically and also economically that this will not be untangled easily, and there is no real intention to entangle it. And more importantly, never underestimate human relations. We have built relations, friendships, intermarriages, everything over the last decades across the Atlantic. There is such a close relationship, also a close cultural relationship between the US and Europe that, if there are some people who feel differently for a while, yeah, we'll survive that.
Okay, our time is almost up, and I would like to ask you one more question. It's a rather personal question. In times that we all sense there's going to be burden sharing. And obviously everybody in this room knows that you're one of the most wealthy people on earth. What is it that money cannot buy for you?
Well, it can't buy me longevity, but I'm not.
Are you sure we don't know that yet because of the advancement of technology?
There are wealthy people who are very involved in funding longevity work, and I won't turn it away. But as long as we've got malaria, I'm not going to push my money for something that's more self-centered. I'm one of the luckiest people ever. I had a incredible career at Microsoft. Now I'm very fulfilled by the foundation work. I'm lucky. I've got great kids. So there's very little, that I say, gosh, I wish my money could buy something, because I have basically everything that I want.
What a wonderful closing sentence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Gates, Peter Leibinger, thank you. Mm-hmm.